Okay, so the first question is Bob needs a new roof on his house. Randy is the president of Randy's Roofing, and he tells him he will complete the job for $7,000 and he will start on Tuesday. Bob is excited and he says it's a deal. What do they have here? Is it A, an express contract, B, an ostensible agency agreement, C, an implied contract, or D, a contract or deed? So remember, an implied contract is one that I haven't actually said. I'm just acting as if it exists, but they've said it here, right? They've said it. Contract for deed is another term for land contract. So a contract for deed wouldn't be right. It's going to actually be the express contract. So the reason why it's express is because Randy and Bob have said it. It's a verbal contract. And that's okay because it's just about a roof that they're putting on. That'd probably be all right for a roof. But remember, we can't have verbal contracts in real estate unless they're short leases, right? And there is a law that says that in order for a real estate contract to be enforceable, and that real estate contracts have to be in writing to be valid, there's a law that tells us that that's the case. Does anybody remember the law that says that real estate contracts have to be in writing? I know short leases don't count, but for the most part, real estate contracts have to be in writing. And remember that contract law, that's a law called the Statute of Frauds. And the Statute of Frauds reminds us that in terms of a real estate contract, we have to have the contract in writing in order for it to be enforceable. All right. So the next question is, Lonnie is selling his investment property to Jen. The property is set to close on April 10th. However, Lonnie collected the rent for the month of April from his tenant at the beginning of the month. Okay, so Lonnie is selling his investment property to Jen. The property is set to close on April 10th. However, Lonnie collected the rent for the month of April from his tenant at the beginning of the month. So what's going to happen here? Jen will receive a credit from Lonnie for the rent from the period from the time of closing until the end of the month. The rent for April will be returned to the tenant and neither Lonnie or Jen will get it. Jen will owe Lonnie a credit for the portion of the month she owns the property, or Lonnie will typically keep all of the rent for the month in which the property is sold. Remember our debits and credits, right? If we're at a closing and we're getting money, it's a credit. And if we're at a closing and we're paying money, it's a debit. And I always remember this, like, if I take out my debit card to pay for something, I swipe my debit card, I'm paying for it. But if I have a credit coming to me, I remember that, like, what if I bought a sweater at the mall and I lost the receipt? But I go back and I take the sweater back to the mall. They're going to give me store credit in order to buy something else. I don't have the receipt. They're not going to give me cash, but they're going to give me store credit. So I'm going to get credit to buy something else or spend the money on something else. And that's how the closings work. When we get a debit, we're giving money. When we get a credit, we're receiving money, right? So Jen will receive a credit from Lonnie for the rent from the period of time from closing until the end of the month. And the reason why is because Lonnie collected that rent in advance. If I collect rent, I usually collect it in advance. My landlord doesn't want the rent for the month at the end of the month. He wants it at the beginning of the month, right? And so since Jen's going to take over as the new landlord on April 10th and the tenant has already paid for the month of April, he's not going to pay again just because there's a new owner. Lonnie will have to Lonnie. I keep calling Ronnie. Lonnie will have to pass that money along to Jen in the form of a credit at the closing. Okay. All right. So next we have a legal document signed by a home buyer to assume responsibility for the obligations of a mortgage made by a former owner is it a deed, an option agreement, an appraisal, or an assumption agreement? What do you guys think? A deed, an option agreement, an appraisal, or an assumption agreement? This is the assumption agreement, right? Because they're assuming the loan, okay? This person is taking over the loan. They're assuming the loan. What does it mean to assume a loan? If I'm assuming a loan, I am taking over the payments on this loan where the old holder of the note left off. So if I assume your loan, let's say that you have a loan that's a 20-year loan and you're 10 years into paying it, and I start to take over where you left off on this loan, then I would sign an assumption agreement that shows what I'm responsible for and that I'm now taking over where you left off. If I don't sign an assumption agreement that the bank approves of, then it's possible that the prior person who had the loan originally would still be on the hook for it. So hopefully we get an assumption agreement where the lender allows for that assumption to happen, right? Now, what if I just buy a property? So here's a question for you guys. What if I just buy a property and I don't actually assume the loan? I leave the loan in your name. I know there's a lien on the property. I know there's a loan owed still on the property, but I leave that loan in your name, but you give me the deed. That's a tough one. What do you guys think that's called? If I buy a property and I know there's an existing loan on it, I'm not actually assuming the loan, but I'm kind of just taking over. I've got the deed to the property now. What do we call that? I'm buying the property subject to the existing mortgage. So that's different than an assumption, because in an assumption, I'm taking responsibility for the loan. I'm going to take over the payments. I'm saying that this is my loan now. But on subject to, I'm leaving the loan over here in your name and I'm buying it and moving forward. I got the deed, I have control, but the loan stays in your name. Now I might mail in the payments or whatever the agreement may be, but the loan remains the primary responsibility of the person who already took it out.